Hello, Internet. Welcome to the Fourth Chuck Chat. Today we're going to talk about another term that is used all the time, everywhere, and obviously since the last election, I've been hearing it more and more, and that's this word efficiency. And who I'm mostly hearing it from are Republican politicians, news anchors, talking heads, supporters. And it's interesting, it's another one of those words, just like how woke has removed itself from the actual meaning and it means either liberal or not liberal. The word efficiency has almost comes to, reflect Republican, toe a party line instead of the actual definition. And so, I find it interesting in a lot of the ways that people are using it in conversation and in practicum. Like the things that they're doing about it don't seem to follow the definition of efficient, which can be a ton of different things. So we're just going to break down, obviously, we're going to be talking about Department of Government Efficiency, right? Musk's brainchild to reduce government, extraneous expenditures and, overstaffing and just, problems with a bloated government. And one of the things I want to start this with is this term efficiency. And again, this is just like everything else we did, fascism and wokeism, and talking about what it is by definition, what it actually means, instead of the feelings that we get, which change every decade based on who's using it and why they're using it. So we're putting our political ideologies aside and talking about efficiency, and we're going to go through some of this administration's decisions and seeing if they fit into that definition of efficient, if it's efficient for the people, for the country, or not. And like I said, I want to start off just by saying that one of the most efficient things we can do as humans is something that we have not really done yet, and that's just learning from our past. We continue to make the same mistakes, and each time we make a mistake we've already made, we're undoing a bunch of progress we already made, going back 10 steps, and then we have to remake up that progress and then continue in the path we already were. And I'm not talking about anything specific, but there's a lot of things that we should have learned at this point, but we keep continuing these cycles because we're decades removed, generations removed, hundreds or thousands of years removed from the last time a certain type of tyrant or a certain type of government or a certain type of social standard or norm or practice or anything has affected generations. And it would behoove us to remember the oldest advice in the entire advice book, which is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And I was reading this other book on the history of the United States, and this just kind of stuck out to me. And in the late 1700s, when this was a very early nation, or even possibly before it was officially its own, whatever, North Carolina regulators warned against the combination of wealth and power. And it was during some kind of governmental meeting of some point, who knows. But they were condemning officials whose highest study is the promotion of their wealth. And that was the quote: highest study is the promotion of their wealth. And so that means that, watch out for people whose primary objective is making themselves wealthier and more powerful. And that probably, they were probably warning against the crown in England before that. And then this is obviously talking about landowners or wealthy businessmen or politicians that are taking advantage of the lower classes. I imagine they had similar warnings in the Egyptian times and in the Incan and Aztec and Mayan times, and in Babylonian and the Roman and Greek Empire. So this is just stuff we've said over and over. And we as humans, because capitalism is here, it's here to stay, we have this really interesting thing where we continually demonize and idolize people that have wealth and power at the same time, depending on, you know, who you want to, and we have a really difficult time not getting starstruck. And so that's why when people will say something, we kind of remove ourselves from the definition, or, you know, if they do something, we kind of give them passes that we might not give other people. And you know, so again, we're gonna, you know, hold them to the fire. We're talking about efficiency. They chose that word, so we're going to talk about it. Now, that said, I think that all of us can pretty much agree that our government is bloated at this point. There are many, many ways, many places that there are inefficiencies, and those can be old technology, antiquated systems, too many employees, not good enough training, spending too much on things, spending money on things we don't have to spend on. It can come up in just so many different ways. And again, I think we can all agree that there are ways that we can improve the way our government runs, the way it spends and budgets, how it handles certain things. I think we can all agree on that. We might not agree on exactly what we should do, and that's where this comes in. So even with, you know, with Musk and Trump teaming up, if you love Musk and Trump, you're going to think that everything they do is efficient, is good. And if you're not a fan, you're going to think that everything they do is bad. And so I'm here to try and toe that line and recognize some of the things that that Elon has done since presidency to that seems like it's working out well, and then other things that, you know, we can question their the efficiency of these choices. And for those who are not a fan of, you know, the current administration, I would say open up your mind, and, you know, there are ways that maybe we can trim some fat that would be okay, and we can give someone credit where credit is due. And for the other side, those people that are, you know, hardcore Musk Trump fans, you know, a lot of times we'll look at our heroes through rose-colored glasses, and it's okay, you know, I mean, if they promised you efficiency, it's okay for you, especially, you know, you voted for them, you know, you gave them your trust to make the government more efficient, to drain the swamp, to, you know, cut costs, this and that. And so, you know, it's not just okay for you to double check their work and see if it is efficient, but it's up to you more than it is, you know, others that are not fans, to hold them accountable. You know, they're going to listen to you more than they're going to. So if you're like, look, we don't like this change that you're making, it doesn't make any sense, then it's okay to stand up. You know, these are important things, and it's okay. We're not dealing with all-powerful gods. We're dealing with people that make mistakes, and it's okay to call them out. We don't have to send them to prison. We can just say, hey, that's not you know, what we voted for, and so let's move on. You know, I'd also like to remind us that efficiency, Trump's first presidency, I would not necessarily call his decision-making processes efficient. They're efficient potentially for like his very specific goals, but, you know, fiscally, socially, things like that, if we're talking about you know, tightening up this country, it really wasn't all that efficient in a lot of ways. And that's aside from like gold-plated toilets and, you know, spending, you know, golfing once every 5.5 days at $3.5 million a pop. You know, even though he's probably doing stuff, taking phone calls and stuff like that. But but so Trump got he was bequeathed Obama's really good economy. You know, Obama did a really awesome job, you know, objectively speaking. He took Bush's really shaky economy that started to really gain some debt and lose ground, you know, the housing crisis in 2008. And Obama did a really good job adding jobs, adding wealth, increasing the average household income, you know, and you know, surplus spending, and that, you know, just, you know, spending less than taxes were taking in. And obviously we're adding debt left, right, and center, but in terms of budgeting, he did a really good job. And so Trump was given this you know, positive upward motion economy and immediately started deficit spending, which means spending more than taxes are coming in, so immediately adding to the debt in that way, which is it's just, you know, not efficient. He was given this really great economy on a silver platter and kind of you know, dropped the ball even before COVID happened. And even, you know, I mean, a specific example would be his first trade war with China, where you know, 90% of the money that he made from tariffs went directly back to farmers in the form of a check, because, you know, and Trump claimed that he was very friendly to the farmers, but it's like China said, oh, you're gonna do these tariffs, we'll find soy and beef and, you know, corn, wheat, or whatever somewhere else. And they did, you know, so they're getting beef, you know, they started raising their own cattle, and they started getting soy from like Brazil and South America. And so they had to, so the administration had to cut a huge check to the farmers that they all had to split against each other to make up for this loss. And this loss is not something that was a one-year thing, right? China pulled out, and so the farmers are either going to find a replacement market for China, which is crazy because it's a huge, huge market. They're going to just eat these losses, or they're going to get bailed out by the government every year. None of these really would seem efficient. If they're obviously to replace the markets, it'd be great, but it's really tough to do in this world. And China is just, they buy a lot of stuff, you know, there are a lot of people there. You know, so that being said, it's good that Musk wanted to come in and talk about efficiency, but we've already had one administration that shows us that efficiency is not necessarily a strong point of the Trump camp. You know, he's showy. You know. That being said, the first thing I'm going to do when we're talking about the Department of Government efficiency is I'd like to highlight a couple things that I found that I thought were pretty good. One of them was he cut 7,000 IRS jobs, and you know, and the IRS, you know, I was curious, IRS still performed at like a 98% you know, tax return in timely fashion sort of rate, and so that is really, really strongly efficient. That also comes after the Biden administration hired a ton of IRS people and had a 10-year plan to hire 85,000, most of which were going to be filling seats that were from people that retired or whatever. But so I think 35,000 were hired in his past couple of years, and so the 7,000 is, you know, slim in comparison to that, but still, you know, a step in the right direction, because if we're getting rid of 7,000 jobs but still performing at 98%, that's a good thing. That is efficient. Biden also made that website, the government website, similar to TurboTax, so any individual can go online and either do TurboTax or go through this website or any other website and do their taxes for free. And so not only did he add more workers to help, but he also had someone make a website that actually works pretty well, not like you know, not like the Obamacare website, right? But so, you know, Biden already set up a really efficiently working IRS, and you know, Musk removed a bunch of those workers, but because it was still stacked, it still performed at that level. But I think that that's still pretty efficient. The one thing I will say is it looks like most of the people that were lost were a lot of auditors, and a lot of what the auditors do is they're dealing with higher end like clients, right? Like rich folks or like, you know, huge corporations, to put a closer lens on their taxes to make sure that they're not doing anything sly. And so unfortunately, the one thing that we might have lost is the ability to catch loopholes or cheats. But again, for the most part, for you and I, for the normal taxpayers, we're still getting all of our stuff done on time and properly with 7,000 fewer employees, which saves the government money, and so that's pretty efficient. Another thing that's efficient is you know, deportations. They can be very efficient. They've been used forever by everyone all the time, and if they're properly done, we have court systems, and we have this, you know, things in place for this for people to be properly vetted, and then they'll decide, yes, you can stay, no, you can't stay. And that is, you know, I mean, I think Obama and Biden both have far larger deportation numbers, so it's not anything unusual. It's not anything, you know, I mean, it's kind of necessary to have to do to keep that balance. It just matters the way that you do it. Because if you start sending people away that shouldn't be sent away or that didn't go through due process, now you have to bring them back. Now you have to go through the courts. Now you're going to have you know, higher courts make these decisions. Now you have all these extremely expensive lawyers and civil rights activists and groups and all this like back and forth. And so, you know, us sending that gentleman from Maryland away instead of costing like $6,000 or whatever to process him and maybe keep him here and maybe send him away, is probably going to cost like hundreds of millions of dollars now, especially after the settlement goes through. But and so in terms of efficiency, you know, deportations, yes, but doing it properly, because again, efficiency has a whole bunch of different elements to it, you know, and so you just have to try to, you know, make sure you're doing it properly. For instance, I mean, so many people say you have to, you know, you got to spend money to make money, and that kind of works with efficiency as well. Like if, instead of rounding up a whole bunch of people and throwing them wherever and then hoping that no one calls us out on it and creates an issue because we, you know, accidentally deported a U.S. citizen, you know, adding more judges. I know it costs more, but it will make things go faster and it'll be more efficient, and it won't be, you know, we won't have these legal mix-ups that we're going to have to backtrack 10 steps and then spend even more money, more time, more resources, more man hours, all this stuff just to fix a screw up, right? Measure twice, cut once, and that's about some of the oldest advice that we can probably agree with also. And so this, you know, I think that Musk has, if he has good intentions, which you kind of have to hope and assume that he does, then he's just not measuring twice. You know, he's just kind of eyeballing it, giving it a whack, and then hoping he doesn't have to glue a bunch of stuff back, which is not an efficient way to build a house, right? You will find problems. Some of the other successes too are, I'm going to bring them up because they are kind of subjective. A lot of them are DEI and things like foreign aid cuts. And so, you know, if you're someone that thinks that these programs are important, then you're not going to see them as successes. You're going to see them as inefficiencies, because later down the line, we're probably going to have to pay twice as much just to make up the ground that we lost recently. But if you're not a fan of these things, then you will see these as efficiencies. As, you know, if you're dropping programs that you don't agree with, then you would not, you know, you're going to be all for it. And with the foreign aid thing, it's interesting because one of two things is going to happen. We're dropping foreign aid, and so that means people are starving, diseases are spreading, there's water purification projects, forestation projects, there's government interference, all these things that we usually try to have a helping hand with. And so either we're going to reassess and then realize it's better for us and the whole world to give this aid, and then we're going to have to spend way more to make up for the ground that we're losing because we cut the aid, or we're just going to ignore the rest of the world for the rest of the United States' existence, which doesn't seem likely. So miserable, and they're angry, and they're hungry, and they're hateful, and they're violent, but your country's making a lot of money. You can't see yourself as an efficient or as a successful country. You have to take care of the people, which you just don't have to as a corporation. As a corporation, or as a single, as a CEO or investor or whatever, you can outsource all your workers. You can get cheaper goods. You can put it together more shoddy. You can raise the prices. You can give you and your board a bunch of you know, raises, and still at the end of the year, you might still have these profitable margins, and so your company is still seen as efficient, is seen as, you know, this, you know, profitable entity or whatever. But if you start doing that same thing with a country, it doesn't equate the same way. It's just you can't do the same thing. So you have to you have to have a different approach to success. I think it's also noteworthy that there were, last when I looked up a couple days ago, whatever, at least 20 DOGE staffers that were asked to dismantle or take part in dismantling programs that they felt were vital to the public, and so they resigned. And so, we obviously have Musk and whomever else asking them to do things that they feel ethically, morally uncomfortable doing. And so I think that lends itself to some questions as well. And obviously they're being replaced that will do it, right? And which is the easiest and oldest thing in the world too. Now, when it comes to government reduction, again, I think that we all agree that the government's a little bit too big. So Musk, or it looks like, with all the layoffs, firings, with the early buyouts, the leavings, that I've seen numbers from 150,000 to about 280,000. So I'm just going to assume, I'm going to go to the highest and say it's about 280,000 jobs. That could be different. I would definitely say look it up if that specific number is important to you. And at least that I saw, at least 25,000, so just about 10% or more, based on how many jobs are actually lost, had to be asked to come back for various reasons, and that's not including all the legal challenges. So we could see another 100,000 employees come back if the layoffs or whatever are not held up as legal or constitutional. And so when it comes to reducing the government, I would ask the same thing that I looked at for the IRS, right? The IRS, they added a bunch of jobs, but they were able to reduce a bunch of jobs, but still run at a 98% efficiency rate, right? That is good. Those are good numbers. And so for everything else that took the biggest hits, I would say, okay, well, you fired 2,500, 4,000 people from this organization, this department, whatever. Is it still running at the same speed that it was before? Is it still helping all the people? Is it still getting all the research done? Is it still doing all these things? Or did you cripple it to whatever percentage? And so some of the departments that took the biggest hits, just a small handful, are Department of Health and Human Services. And there's a lot of people in this country that need things, whether it's help with insurance or billing or housing stuff, or help with utilities, or if they're disabilities or whatever, huge amounts. So I would ask, are they still reaching all the people that they have to reach, that they're legally required to reach? That's what this was set up for by the government. The Center of Disease Control and Prevention, right? We would not have had Operation Warp Speed so efficiently and quickly enacted had it not been for the CDC already studying and working on a vaccine for one of the SARS-CoV variants or whatever. And so the CDC was just doing what it does, which is studying diseases and working on figuring out how they spread and how to create vaccines, as well as everything else with them. And it's not like they just happen to have been, they were working on hundreds or thousands but them doing their thing. And so us taking thousands of workers away from there could be, whatever the next pandemic is, if they're just not working on that, if it comes out of nowhere, if monkeypox all of a sudden is at the same rate of as COVID was, but we took away the monkeypox study group or whatever for the vaccine because it wasn't really seen as that important, well, we're probably in a lot of trouble. The FDA, which I know RFK Jr.'s taking a couple whacks at, or whatever the genius that he is, they've lost thousands and will probably lose thousands more. But what's interesting is a group that was investigating Neuralink's trials, and not because there was anything nefarious going on with Neuralink. The FDA, one of their jobs is, if you're testing humans, if you're testing some new medical, either a medication or a technology on human beings, the FDA is there to make sure that you're just following the rules, that you're not doing anything crazy stuff. It was only in the 1950s that we were taking people and doing weird experiments. We have horror movies about it, and that's all the FDA is there to stop you from doing, is stop you from abusing, you know, people that you're testing this really important stuff on. And so they, you know, Elon Musk didn't want to be investigated or watchdogged, and so he fired him. The other one's the Forest Service, which I personally have, you know, a great love for. I think that that's all, a lot of that is hands-on work. I don't think that the Forest Service can really afford to lose anyone, but it seems like this government's going to start selling off federal land, so they might not need any forest workers in the next 10 years or so. Then we got the Department of Agriculture, which right now we're going through a ton of floods, a ton of fires, a ton of droughts, a ton of crazy weather, and that's all affecting our farmers. That's all affecting our agriculture. Pretty important stuff. And Department of Energy, who's, you know, keeping track of our nuclear plants, making sure that they're stable, making sure that they're safe, making sure that we're progressing with them and they're getting, you know, more efficient or whatever. You know, so these are some of the ones that took the larger hits that I saw. And again, a ton of people were asked to come back, and so it's this yo-yo effect. And so you fire a bunch of people without telling anyone, maybe not even legally. They go home, and then you say, oh, you know what, we realized your job was actually really important. Can you please come back? Well, some of them aren't. A lot of them are coming back with much lower morale, and they've already lost, like, footing on the studies that they're done. They might have lost, you know, like, not patients, but you know, test specimens, or they might have lost notes, or I mean, it's, you know, we're losing out on things that we're already working on with the idea of saving money, and that is not necessarily what efficiency means. And so, you know, that's why I'm putting it under a scope. The same thing with the 17 inspector generals. You know, it's like we have 74 in this country, and so, you know, this administration fired roughly 22% of them, and not even necessarily legally, but like most of them, it seems like, are connected with something that has to do with Trump or Musk or their business, or a business partner of theirs. You know, got rid of the guy that, or the group that was in charge of space exploration, right? So SpaceX is no longer, there's no longer a watchdog for that, and they're going to replace him with someone who's a friend. The guy doing Neuralink trials, gone. You know, car inspections. So Tesla, right now he gets to, you know, work on that without having an inspector general keeping him under those tracks. Social media, the one for that was watching distribution of pandemic money for whatever reason was like. There was another one that was watching over the distribution of, you know, vaccines and masks and things like that, and he was like those. And so if you looked at all 17, most likely they're all tied in with someone specifically. And I think that any normal person would raise questions. They would be like, oh, that seems a small amount shady, you know. One thing we'll bring up too, and I know it's early on in Musk's presidency, his tenure here or whatever, and he did say that he was going to try and cut out $2 trillion, and the current, I think the current fiscal year is like $7.3 trillion budget. So he was hoping to cut roughly 27%, when in actuality I think his website is claiming $160 billion, which a lot of people are also questioning. And down the line we'll have to see if that $160 billion of savings actually holds up, or if we have to spend more money backtracking for a lot of that. But instead of the 27%, $160 billion is actually closer to 2% of the fiscal year budget. So, you know, we'll see if he finds any more ways, you know, to save, to make up for that trillion, 1.84 trillion that he hasn't made up for. So some of the more questionable things will go down the line too. Some of the more questionable things at the Department of Government Efficiency, in terms of efficiency, they've fired key pandemic scientists that they were part of the group that was brought back. And so again, we're losing ground on research we were already doing. They might have lost parts of the research, or they might have needed this to be sequential, and now they have to like start things over. And so not only did we have to rehire them, but we're probably losing actual money because we lost days studying. You know, granting access to staffers to classified information. Now we have to have these internal investigations, which always cost a ton of money, and it's just inefficient, it's unnecessary. He probably could have gone a legal avenue to do this stuff. Gutting bureaus to the point where they're incapable of performing their required duties by law, and so then they had to bring people back in and unfire them and uncancel contracts. U.S. aid, again, in the long run, I think that most likely us cutting funds to all these countries, we're probably just going to have to pay 4 times more down the line, and while incurring a bunch of losses and a bunch of, like lost trade and lost trust and all this other stuff. The halting of the previously approved contracts, those were, these were, it's not like it was a bunch of like gay rights parades. Like they were rebuilding roads, they were rebuilding bridges, they were maintenance in schools, they were studying disease stuff, studying tech stuff, studying bio stuff, studying environmental stuff. And so all these really important things, and it's not like the Department of Rhode Island Transportation just gets to pocket $400 million. Like they're paying contractors, and so those contractors are paying construction workers, and those roads are going to be improved for the people going in and out of Providence from Warwick or Boston or whatever. And and so you're screwing over like the infrastructure economically and like physically of the United States when you're doing this sort of stuff. Canceling, not giving money to Harvard isn't just screwing over this rich guy with a suit in Harvard. It's screwing over students. It's screwing over people that are trying to figure out, all the latest tech for everything, or the latest, whatever for whatever. You're screwing over entire companies. You're screwing over, advancements that we could be making before the rest of the world making, so that we can capitalize on those. Creating, new weather systems and new vaccines and new, biomechanical anything. And so, again, you're not just like screwing over a bunch of rich Harvard elites. You're kind of screwing everyone over when you take away money, especially that was already promised. These contracts were already written up. And so just hugely inefficient. And even some stupid, like I wrote down reducing the FAA in times of collisions. I know they didn't fire a whole bunch of air traffic controllers, but you started reducing something in a time where collisions are up and malfunctions are up, individual plane malfunctions. And so taking away people that should either be inspecting these things, working on the communications, and very importantly updating these very old systems. Right, we have systems from like the 80s and 90s, and that's 30-40 years ago, and we have so many more planes and so much new technology and all this, and so there's another one where we need to be putting in to be more efficient rather than taking out, right? Because again, efficiency doesn't just mean cheap. If you wanted to call it the Department of Government Reduction, or the Department of Government Savings, or the Department of Government Reshaping, like that would have been fine. But he used the word efficiency, right? And efficiency does not mean spending less on it, right? Chernobyl is still radioactive because they spent a small amount less on one element that they didn't think was very important. We're still cleaning up an oil spill up in Alaska from the 80s or 90s or whatever, because they skipped out on some safety precautions, right? Because they just wanted to drill baby drill. And and so when we're looking 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the line, I can cancel my car insurance or all the stuff and just get the bare bones $5 a month, the General's auto insurance right before a road trip, and I'll have more money for a couple sandwiches and a tank of gas. But if something happens to my car, happens to me, happens to someone else, well, now I'm $10,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt because I just saved myself like $500 on my quote, right? And so efficiency does not mean cheap. It doesn't mean spending less money. In many people's minds, maybe that's exactly what it means, but that's empirically, that's not what it's mean, and that's not a healthy way to see it when you're talking about a nation. Again, a company, sure, an investment portfolio, absolutely, but not a nation made of 350 completely different people, you know. And what's also really interesting to me is if they're just trying to cut costs, like we've all seen videos or heard examples of what the government pays for things. You know what I'm saying? Like $12 for a pen, $35 for a screw, like all this crazy shit that that we're buying over and over and over, where if they were just like, they're supposed to be these great negotiators, if they were just renegotiate these contracts and be like, you know, we're not going to spend 15 times more than everyone else in the world for this stupid little stuff just because we're the U.S. government. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's like the spending, the overspending on a lot of really silly things that they're buying all the time would save a huge amount of money every single purchase cycle, whether that's weekly or monthly or, you know, tri-monthly or yearly or whatever, and it would not disrupt anything. All it would be doing is us not paying 50 times more for little stupid stuff that, you know, for whatever reason the government has created these contracts for, you know, $8,000 tables that you get at Walmart for 40 bucks. You know, and on the other hand, on the flip side of that, stripping regulation becomes extremely expensive. And one of the reasons a lot of the wealthiest investors are extremely excited about the Trump presidency, which is something that, you know, we look at and we're like, oh, this seems cool. Japan wants to invest $500 billion in this. They did, you know, $460 billion during the Biden administration. No one bragged about it, and so, you know, it's not anything new. It's just Trump likes people to make a show of things, and so Japan came over, kissed his ring. That one investor, you know, but that guy also, you know, again, gave $460 billion investing in this country during the Biden time. Biden just didn't brag about it. However, he's more excited this time because of the deregulation, right? So now Musk is running Tesla with less regulation, X and Truth social media, as well as like Twitter and everything else, Instagram with less regulation. Let's see, AI is going to be, we're going to see a lot of reduced regulation there. We're seeing regulation. They started gambling, you know, ultimately gambling with the customer's money to make more money on the side. And the reason we have regulations is because, you know, if, you know, all banks are doing this, but it's very low risk investments, right? If you go higher and higher risk, you have a chance of losing money. You have the government to bail you out, but you're also, I mean, you know, if you have $10 million in the bank and the bank gambles all your money away and you're FDIC insured for $250,000, you just lost, you know, $9.75 million, you know. And that's why these regulations are up, right? These regulations are up because we've had oil spills in natural preserves. We don't need any more oil spills in natural preserves. There's 1.5 natural preserves in the entire country. We don't need to destroy them. You know, things like water, fire, I mean, all this stuff, you know, like bad things have happened. We respond to it and set up what we call regulations. And all a regulation is you can't do this because it's going to do this, and we know this because it's already happened, right? And so again, removing all these regulations, which is what all these billionaire companies are excited about, is a dangerous thing. And if nothing bad happens, that'd be awesome. However, statistically speaking, especially since these regulations exist, at least one disaster will probably occur, you know. The last one I think I'll try to talk about is just the education systems. You know, whether or not you agree with the protests, you can call it pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian or anti-Israeli or pro-Israeli or whatever it is. But having, like, pulling money from universities that already have, they have protests every year for stuff. This isn't anything new, right? All the colleges that have, especially the higher colleges, where you have a lot of people very intelligent people, very strong-minded people, people from all different walks, and a lot of people from very influential walks. But you have a lot of protests, and it's not anything new. They probably were protesting things in the 20s, definitely the 50s, definitely the 60s, definitely the 70s, all the way through. They're protesting all the time. So it's not like they just started protesting. And protesting at colleges is part of the college experience, right? That's like, if you're getting this rounded education, now you're getting an education in social activism, in public speaking, in civic law, right? In constitutional law, figuring out what you can do, what you can't do, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And, sending internationals away because they're protesting is devastating for two reasons. One, it's a dangerous route to start taking. If you have a different idea, or you look different, or you're from somewhere different, and you sound different, we're just going to kick you out of this country. That's really dangerous, and especially if it's on a campus. Campuses are supposed to be safe areas, they're academic areas, and again, if you don't agree with them, you don't have to, right? Colleges, campuses aren't changing any huge policies. It's a bunch of kids protesting stuff. That's it, right? So they might change the public's mind one way or the other, but that's also fine and not a reason to get kicked out of the country. And also, the same thing, when you take money away from these universities, you're not taking it away from, this money isn't going straight into the pockets of the board, right? They're funding studies and scholarships, and they're building new buildings and upgrading technology. Also, this country can get better. All the best bio, all the best medical, all the best mechanical, all the best tech, all the best robotics, all that stuff comes from universities. And so you're really, really just hurting us in the long run, in terms of what we're going to have to regain. We're going to have to do all that stuff again. We're going to have to go back to these studies and make up for lost time. And B, a lot of other countries are going to continue moving forward. So they're not stopping because they don't like protest. They're letting the universities do what the universities do. And it's also, we are the place to go for most things, I imagine, around the world for most people. And so if we start booting internationals because we don't like what they say or what they look like or what they sound like, they're not going to want to come here and help our country. They're not going to want to get educated from us, and in doing so, assist in our studies in whatever capacity. They're not going to want to study here, they're not going to go to schools here, they're not going to want to work for us, they're not going to want to share their talent and their education with us. They're just not going to. Why would they? And so, I think that's all I got for now. Same thing as everything. Just listen for all these terms, all these words that are all of a sudden used, and I know that contextually, a lot of the times it goes in and goes out, and we hear the word efficiency, and we understand for the most part what they're talking about until they use it so much where it just basically means Republican or Democrat. But let's start to pick these words out and see if they're using it in the right way, and then see if they're actually doing what they said they would do. Are they using efficiency, the term, in the correct way, and are they being efficient? And we get to see in the future if they are, if they are not, and judge for ourselves and just hope that they're doing the best. And if they're not, hope that there's some kind of checks and balance that brings us back on the right course. So just keep that ear open. Get that critical thinking cap. Keep that thing on at all times, because you get a lot firing at you from every direction, and it's good for us to stop every now and then and be like, all right, let's see these words they're using, and let's define them, and then see if they fit the narrative. So anyway, that is now officially all I got.